Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. It's me again, we're back. I hinted that I would maybe have news for you, and I still don't. So I will, however, be posting later today, which for you will be yesterday, a new blog post on querying. I think I'd like to do a post on just like publishing in general, it broken down into various arenas of concern. Just because I have my craft posts that are just about writing specifically, and then probably people who want to publish things will want to know how that process goes. But I only newly know how some of that process goes, so we're just now getting to it. So we're going to do a writing question, and then we will move on to a little bit of an excerpt from the forthcoming Which Way anthology. I have not decided at this moment which part I'm going to read to you. I've been hinting at this anthology for a while, so I've been writing for Which Way magazine since 2016. And a lot of the stories that I have published in the magazine have never been revealed at any other time. Especially 2018, 2019, I wrote a lot of stories that I'm very fond of that no one has ever seen. So those are going to be available in this anthology, as well as a new story that I've written. So naturally, the new story that I wrote specifically for this collection is the one that's kind of like very tempting for me to read aloud because it was just recently written. But also one of my favorites, Stone's Throw, it's also in the anthology. So this is an exciting opportunity for me to share with you things that if you're not a subscriber to the magazine, you maybe haven't seen before. And if you are a subscriber to the magazine and you like my fiction, then you get to have it all in one place. I did have to pick and choose, so some of my new stuff, like Love in the Time of Dystopia, is not in it. Neither is The Magician's Assistant, which was my Georgian era romance. So I guess I might have to do another anthology after this, but let's focus on this for right now. Our next spell read, I wanted to be very clear about this. I've not read it, so I don't know if it's the right fit. We're gambling on this one. I've been reading a lot of books that I was like, oh, this will be perfect for spell, and it turns out not to be. So I've kind of run into the end of my rope, especially because there are some books that I have reserved for future times because I feel they're more specific, more appropriate for certain times of year. For example, I really wanted to do something gothic for Halloween, so we will be doing that. But for this month, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I really wanted to look at religion and how that fits into womanhood because it is very significant. I get a lot of questions from people who are raised in conservative religious backgrounds where they're either questioning those beliefs or questioning like whether they can still have those beliefs and still be, you know, a modern woman and a feminist, and I think it's possible. I'd like to think it should be possible, that there's no reason to come down so hard on all religion the way that a lot of literature tends to do, I think. I'm just really looking for a fair way to look at it, and I'm hoping that this is a character who's very torn between, have I said the name of the book? Probably not. The book we're reading this month is You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat, and so it's about a queer Palestinian immigrant. So it's kind of being caught on the precipice of religion and culture and sexuality. And I think it also has a great deal to do with her relationship with her mother. So I'm hoping this will be interesting for us. There's a lot of books that I feel like a lot of books that focus on the mother-daughter relationship are naturally quite feminist, even if they aren't. The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna, for example, is something I think of as like a very interesting story about womanhood and you know what it means to be a woman and how you can't tell a woman's story without telling her mother's story. But it's also not really appropriate for spell because I like to take a very sex-positive attitude with the books I choose. And again, I don't know whether that's going to come through in this book. I should stop excusing myself, but yeah, it's just the last book I read about Palestinian immigrants was tough. I felt that it came down unnecessarily hard on the culture as a whole. It seemed to me that, you know, by the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, so is there anything good about this? And I don't feel that I should ever be put in a position to decide there's nothing valid about a culture or a religion or, you know, a internal family hierarchy. So hoping this is a little bit more fair. All right, so the first question is kind of tough. I've been thinking about this for a long time, like since I got it. So we'll see if I've come to any useful conclusions. Hello, Olivie. I was wondering what your take is on the first book you write is always going to suck. I'm worried that wanting to save a beloved idea for when I'm more experienced is going to stop me from finishing a project, but at the same time, I really want to do it justice. I think maybe what's bothering me is like the misconception of, it's not that the first book you write is going to suck. The first book you write, you're going to love it, and it's going to be such a big deal for you, and it's going to be a huge accomplishment, and for a long time you're going to feel like it's the best thing you've ever written or that you're capable of writing. You're going to be really, really invested in it. And it's just that the hard thing about writing is that the more you do it, the better you get at it. So by default, the more time passes, if you've been writing more during that time, you will always look back on your early work and see things that you could have improved. And it will always look imperfect to you. It will always seem like you should have done something differently, or everything you write is a reflection of yourself at that time. So when I finished writing Masters of Death, I was so attached to it. And it's an emotional story. It's the first of my like reflections on what it means to be human. So it's a big deal for me emotionally. It's very, I felt when I finished it, how am I possibly going to write something better or more interesting than this? And I kind of just resigned myself to the fact that maybe my second book wouldn't be so much of a passion project, which was kind of silly because as time goes on, your first idea becomes old. And so it's a good idea, but the way you feel about it looking back on it is, yeah, that was a great idea, but also I've had a bunch of other ideas. Something I talk about, especially I wrote it into a blog post, I think it was the writing process part 1, where people ask me all the time, like, how do you come up with ideas? And the thing is that as you get better at writing, you also get better ideas. You get more complicated ideas. The first idea that you fully complete is probably very similar to something else. I think that all artists start as imitators. And so the first book you write will be probably very similar to something that's been written before. And whether that's just the trope or the themes or like the idea that you've taken and you've spun some way or you've subverted something that you like into, your own thing. I'm not saying it's not original. I'm just saying that it's probably not the most original idea you'll have. But once you bring that idea to fruition, all of a sudden you can build more. You can make things more complicated. So when you realize, oh, this is how you do it, it suddenly becomes, it's not that your ideas get better, it's that the field of possibility gets wider, and all of a sudden you can carry complex plots that you wouldn't have been able to before. They occur to you because now you can see how to do them. So step 1 is that this first idea is the best idea you've ever had for now, but after you've written this book, you'll probably have another idea after that and many more ideas after that. When you finish this project, if you feel like there were parts that didn't happen as you wanted them to, that you don't actually have the perfect manuscript because there are things that you still didn't quite accomplish, you can always put it aside and come back to it. So when I wrote Alone with You in the Ether, it was called Turn, and at the time it was the best thing I'd ever written. And it didn't query well. I think I only got 2 full manuscript requests, and both agents were kind of like, I don't relate to these characters. And I got very discouraged by it. And also because I felt like, I still feel like the book is stronger in the second half just because of what happens in the plot and what happens to the characters. It's naturally stronger in the second half. So I was frustrated by the responses I was getting, so I put it aside thinking, what am I going to do with this book? It means a lot to me. It's so personal, and I don't want it to just die in my, file of manuscripts, but I also don't know what's wrong with it right now. I don't know why it's not so appealing to other people, even though, it means so much to me. So I ended up putting it aside for like a year, and then when I picked it back up again, I realized it was not very good. Some parts of it I didn't touch, like the first scene in part 4, I made no changes from when I originally wrote it. I maybe moved a comma around or something, but it just stayed as it was. Whereas I massive reconstruction on the part 1 of the book. Even the scene where they first meet, I just completely rewrote the conversation. Your writing is reflective of who you are when you wrote it. So yeah, it is the best that you could do at this time. And I don't think that it makes sense to just hold on to it. I think that you want to work through it, because by working through this idea that you love and that you think is very good, you are going to be capable of doing more in the future. I think in general, most people don't want to be the author of one book. Most people want to be the author of many books. People who want to be writers want to keep writing. And so you have to believe that there are more and better books in you. Naturally, you want to have better books, right? Every book after, you want it to be better than the one you wrote before. Whether you feel that's true that's very subjective. Your relationship with your work. But writing as a career can feel a little bit limiting because you have to focus on one book at a time. You have to, especially if you're traditionally publishing, then you have this one manuscript that's the manuscript that gets you your agent, and then it's the one that you shop around to publishers, and you end up like working and revising this one book for literally years. And so it becomes all about this one work and what this one work says about you. But I like to think of myself as more of like an artist in the larger sense, where like we don't judge any artist by their one major work. We don't judge Van Gogh by the sunflowers. It's everything, their whole career taken as one. And so even though that's not necessarily true of authors, like J.K. Rowling, for example, we're always going to think of her as the author of Harry Potter and nothing else, or Stephanie Meyer in Twilight. That's just how the industry does things. That's just like, once they find something that works, we stick to this thing and we grow this thing because we know it sells. But I think that in terms of you looking at your own work, you want to look at yourself as your body of work. And instead of focusing on this one idea, this one concept, this one thing I'm really in love with, think of it as, this is what I really love right now. This is what's true to who I am as a writer right now. But in the future, I will have new ideas to explore. I will be living in a different world that has new problems. I think this is the other thing, is like, how can you exist in the world? And I don't think you can exist in the world and be isolated to the same imagination. Your imagination, your thoughts, your feelings are going to evolve with all these things that happen around you and things that happen to you with your relationships, if they succeed or fail, as your family changes, as your friends change, as all these things happen to you, you, the artist, evolve as well. And so what you create after that, you can't possibly predict now what it will be. You can't imagine that your next idea will be better because you haven't had it yet, because you're not that person yet. So I guess my conclusion is, I don't think it makes sense to not finish this. I think you need to finish this. And if you are unsatisfied, then put it aside for a while. Like I said, Alone with You in the Ether was the best thing I had written at the time. And then I looked at it and it wasn't. And now, again, it probably is the best thing I've written at this time. But it probably won't be by the end of the year. That's the goal, right? That by the end of the year or by the end of next year, I will have written the next best thing in my oeuvre. So I guess don't be afraid that you're like wasting anything. I don't think that you are. Even Masters of Death, which is technically my first book, was not my first execution of that concept. I wrote 20,000 words of a similar but not the same plot that I eventually abandoned and wrote Masters of Death instead. So everything you write will just spawn something new, something interesting, something that is a reflection of you. So yeah. I hope that helps. All right, so I think I'm going to read you a little bit of The Immortality Project, which is the new story that I wrote. I forgot to even say what the anthology is called. This is why I'm so terrible at selling my own stuff. It's called The Answer You Are Looking For Is Yes, which is, no, I won't tell you what it is. You'll see. So I was choosing between reading a very like artsy passage from Stone's Throw, or the new story, The Immortality Project, is more of it's a little bit more absurd because it's written from the perspective of a woman who's having like a full breakdown. And so we're going to go with her because that feels like the right mood for today. Maybe I'll read you some of Stone's Throw next time. That one is about people who get trapped in a fairy realm. So it's definitely more... it's more of a watercolor piece, whereas this is not. So anyway, this is from The Immortality Project, which is the new story that I wrote specifically for this collection. If you follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen me posting excerpts of this because it was making me laugh. Okay. What follows herewith is a matter of legal documentation, wherein I, Nikita Allegra Asherman, a probably heterosexual cisgender woman of sound body and mind who has consumed no more than 5 improperly made martinis, will be recording the events of my pursuit of Article 1, justice as a result of punitive and immensely not cool sacking from previous position as vice president of well-known software behemoth possessing wildly tyrannical aims, redacted company name, as well as Article 2, morally sound quest for compensation with which any reasonable person would surely agree is owed due to unlawful fuckery by redacted CEO name, previous employer and massively small penis douche, and Article 3, vengeance of an exceedingly rational nature, end quote. Although I have every expectation that the man known forthwith and heretofore as the insufferable bouquet of dicks will henceforth proceed to divest me of any credibility as a result of the aforementioned weaponized sacking, let it be known that I am not only a person of extreme and, dare I say, agonizing competence, but also, importantly, a woman who is very much not having it, and therefore I anticipate what follows to be of equally agonizing clarity, send tweet. Am sober now, regrettably, was not my aim, and will continue to be a matter of avoidance. As I was saying, this document will contain what I believe to be my life's most important work, which I am not undertaking for the purposes of myself alone, but also for humanity. Seeing as I have devoted the past decade of my life to the accumulation of not only commercial accolades, but also technical advancements for the good of redacted company name, I have been granted the keenly unusual position of possessing quite a Rolodex, otherwise known as a little black book, which is filled to the brim with the private lines belonging to some of the world's most influential and horniest tech CEOs. Oh yes, redacted CEO name, you insufferable bouquet of dicks. You thought you'd strip me of all your secrets, didn't you? I hope you're reading this now while you redacted for graphic sexual imagery. Yourself in your corner office, you patronizing blowhard. Yes, you may have kept me out of the room where the decisions were made, and well done you for that. Congratulations on being effectively the dumbest boy in school for the 20th year running, you massively top-heavy fuck. It follows that a man who needed my help to so much as ask nicely for your first round of private equity funding would believe that all secrets remain between two conspiratorial men with strippers sat blithely across their knees. Believe it or not, redacted CEO name, said stripper is at least 10 times smarter than you are and, I have no doubt, astronomically better in bed, which is a fact of which your prissy team of sanguinary lawyers should be aware. Not because it's relevant to what will surely be the scandal of our lifetimes, but because everyone looking at you should be acutely, and better yet uncomfortably, aware of your deficiencies. Legal annotation, uncomfortably noted. Lest this take longer than the week I have very meticulously allotted for this effort in order to lure you into a sense of false security, at this very moment I can practically hear you saying to your old boys club of equally insufferable you-know-whats, legal annotation, here the author is referring once again to phalluses, although whether in the oft-repeated bouquet form or as individual units remains unclear. That poor Ash has slunk back to her very sad flat with her tail between her legs like a good little girl, and wouldn't you know it, you always knew she wouldn't be a problem. She was always like that, you know, desperate for your approval, even in school. Yes, of course you were very good mates at university, but even then you were aware in a sad, sympathetic sort of way that Nikita Asherman was indeed a very desperate sort of chum, but never a real threat. She simply cares too much. It's not her nature to be vindictive. And to you I say directly, fuck right off and redacted for graphic sexual content, obscene language, anatomical impossibility, and general incoherence. To set the scene, in the early aughts, my inarguably sterling academic records will show my transfer from Yale University to Oxford University, where I would ultimately finish with double firsts in computer science and economics. During my time at Oxford, I would meet and become very close acquaintances with the insufferable bouquet of dicks, previously known as my employer, who at the time was a year above me in a similar program of study focused on what the insufferable bouquet, legal annotation, of dicks, spoke of with incessant poeticism as the language of algorithms, aka what every fucking computer science student was also studying, you detestable pighead man. At the time, I will admit to being a bit awed by him, as many others were, hence the subsequent founding of redacted company name, in a brothel of a flat that he and I shared with our third founder, whom I will henceforth be referring to as the weaselly little shit who owes me a literal $1 billion. I will abbreviate as Weasel. On a particularly sauce night over takeaway, weasel, bag of dicks, legal annotation, bag appears to be interchangeable with the term bouquet from this point on, and I came up with the idea for a social networking platform that would form the basis for a mausoleum of personal data. I was aware of the unethical nature of such a venture, but was also very hungry and needed urgently to pay rent. In our collective excitement, Bag of Dicks and I had extremely subpar sex during which I did not finish. Although we would later go on to receive a billion-dollar valuation within the year, Bag of Dicks would never satisfy me sexually, despite nearly 2 decades to follow of similar encounters. In the event he claims this is untrue, believe me, it is not. I blame myself for faking orgasms, and for accepting the position of vice president rather than chief technical officer in order to pacify our investors, whom I now suspect had not actually voiced this concern, but rather fulfilled an excuse presented to me privately by Bag of Dicks while I was too distracted by the failing health of my mother. Side note, eat shit, CEO name redacted, in order to ensure that I would never have full access to his private technological aims. Which brings us to now, the day after I arrived at the office to find the door locked and my personal possessions boxed up and waiting for me in the corridor. This, as I've mentioned, is no doubt in response to my sniffing around, quoth Bag of Dicks, the fundamental misconduct to which we have now arrived, the Immortality Project. Surely it will not have escaped the attention of the lawyers I can only presume to be billing at crippling, exorbitant rates, that the Bag of Dicks in question is a man of absurd and staggering means, with not only a tangible fortune, but also an unprecedentedly high valuation that he would not possess without my assistance. Legal annotation, exaggerated verbiage, and as yet undetermined conclusion aside, this is a valid summary of the pertinent facts. My aim, as follows, is to reveal to the world the insidious intentions of one Bag of Dicks and his weasel, and in so doing, collect not precisely the amount I am owed, the money is not at issue, although it would be well within my rights to make demands, but some degree of recompense in the form of indemnification to my reputation. This is a matter of restoration, not comeuppance. Though, if Bag of Dicks happens to eat a proverbial Bag of Dicks as a result of the following documentation, there will be no complaints from me. So anyway, the answer you are looking for is yes, will be coming soon. You will hear that announcement from me, I am sure, probably later this month. Anyway, that is all for me. This has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.